Okay, so last time we looked at multiplying and dividing, the rules for determining the signs when you multiply and divide. And all you need to do really is determine the sign first, and then you multiply and divide just like you always have, right? The sign didn't change the operation. But today we're going to look at adding and subtracting with signs. And because we're used to thinking of those signs, the pluses and minuses, as addition or subtraction symbols, we kind of have to rethink what we're doing now. Because we can't think of those pluses and minuses as being add or subtract. Because now that we have the sign rules, sometimes when it looks like addition, you'll actually subtract. And when it looks like subtraction, you'll actually add. So you can't think of them as being plus or minus anymore. That plus means that your term is a positive. That minus means that your term is a negative. So the very first thing we want to do is replace the terminology of adding and subtracting with the word combining. Combining still means putting things together, right? And that's what addition and subtraction do. They put them together or take them apart, but we need to think of it all as combining. Okay? So that's the first part. Think of these as combining. Now, this still is the old operations of add or subtract, but now you've got to take it up one more step. And this is not going to hurt you. Even if you go back to arithmetic problems, you can still use these same rules and get the right answer. Right? Right now, we're just trying to ask you to be a little more sophisticated in your thinking. Okay? Now, when you're combining, there are still just two sentences, and they look very similar to the sentences that we used when we were multiplying and dividing. That's a bad thing for most people. Because since the rules for multiplying and dividing are so easy, everybody wants to use the easy rules. Well, you can't. You must not interchange these. You have to use the rules for multiplication and division when you're multiplying or dividing only. And you have to use the rules for combining all the rest of the time, right? Because remember, in mathematics, there are only 4 operations. Well, now 3. Add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So if it's not multiply or divide, then it has to be what? Combine. Okay? So it's easy to tell when to do what rule, but you have to remember that there are different rules and make sure you use the different rules. All right, so here, what we're going to do first is we're going to start by just giving you the 2 sentences, the 2 rules. And they start off exactly the same as the last rules we looked at. Oops, sorry. Let me fix that. If the signs, could someone let her in, please, are the same. Now again, what did I mean by if the signs are the same? Both positive or they're both negative, right? Because you never try to add more than one number at a time anyway. So if the signs are the same, what you're going to do, is you'll keep that sign. So if they're both positive, then your answer is going to be a positive. If they're both negative, then your answer will be a negative. So see how that's different from multiplying? So you've got to be really careful about what operation you're using and use the right rule for it. You'll keep that sign and you'll add the numbers. So even if they're negatives, you're still going to add them. So see what I mean by sometimes it'll look like it's subtraction, it's minus, and you actually end up adding. Okay. Let's get the other rule up, and then we're going to look at some examples of how to use them. Easy to learn, but you got to remember when to use them. That's the hard part. Okay. Second rule says that if the signs are different. Now, what does it mean when I say the signs are different? You've got a positive and a negative, or a negative and a positive. Does the order of them make any difference? No. It's just the combination of them that makes a difference. Good. Then what you'll do is keep the sign of the larger number. Now, this is a bit of a cheat because negatives are really always smaller than positive, but we're not worried about what sign they are. We're trying to determine the sign of the answer. So all we're looking at is the number. So if you see a 4 and a 7, which one do you think is bigger? 7. That's what I mean. Just look at what it's called absolute value. It just means the number value. Don't worry about the sign. You're looking at the number. So if the 7 was negative and the 4 was positive, keep the negative because the 7 is the bigger number, right? Okay? Think of it like this. It is more negative than the 4 is positive. Okay? So keep the sign of the larger number, and then you'll subtract the numbers. Okay? Keep the sign of the larger number, and then subtract the numbers. That's all there is to it. That's all the rules that you're going to see today. Now we're going to still stay with parentheses. We're going to have to talk about parentheses some more because you're going to see a lot of parentheses in these problems. Most of the time the parentheses that they put in these problems were put there not because you needed them. They're put there because they want you to see, hey, look at this. This is a negative number. And they're going to do it a lot in these first two exercises. I don't like it. I wish I could change it, but I can't. It's just what we got to work with, so we're going to have to just work with it. Anytime you see a parentheses, you should think those 3 steps for parentheses. Don't just assume they're meaningless. Go through the 3 steps. Look where first? Inside, then you look for an exponent, and then finally the coefficient and multiplier. Remember last time we were here, we saw that coefficient or multiplier can sometimes just be a sign, right? It doesn't have to be a number. Sometimes it's just a sign. So you just follow the sign rules. So anytime you see parentheses in a problem, get rid of the parentheses first by going through those 3 steps that you already know. Now, some of them you can just glance at and see that parentheses doesn't have anything to do. And that's fine if you're at that level. But if not, you need to walk yourself through those steps so that you can eliminate the parentheses in the proper manner. Okay? So, how do I know it's combining? Well, if it's not multiply or divide, it must be combine, right? So it's easier to tell what combining isn't and then know that it's combining. Well, and that's fine because the order of operations says I'd have to do the multiplication and division when? First anyway. So I need to look for multiplication and division before I start looking at combining anyway, right? So that's fine. But walk yourself through it. Is it multiply? Is it divide? No, then it has to be combine. When you're combining, if the signs are the same, what do you do with the sign? Keep it. So if they're both positive, your answer is A. If they're both negative, your answer is A, negative. And so you got to watch out because you've all learned this. Even if it wasn't ever taught to you, you've learned it, and it's wrong, by the way, that 2 negatives always make a positive. Anybody ever heard that before? I've never had a student in a class that say that's not true. It's not true. 2 negatives multiplied together make a positive. 2 negatives divided make a positive. But 2 negatives combined makes a negative. So get it out of your head. If you know that, if you use that rule, 2 negatives make a positive, dump it. It's a shortcut that doesn't work. It's not true. Now, if you learned it as 2 negatives multiplied makes a positive, that's fine, right? But don't say 2 negatives make a positive, ever. Okay? All right. Just warning you about the things that I know that we have done to you in the past by telling you this silly business. Oh, we're going to do lots of examples. We're just not there yet. All right. What are you going to do to the number parts then? After you keep the sign, what do you do to the numbers? Add them. Okay. The second rule says that if the signs are different, you're going to keep which sign? The larger. You bet. And then what are you going to do to the numbers? Subtract them. And remember, when you're doing the subtraction, it's always the big one minus the small one, right? When you're trying to get the order. That messes with students too sometimes. If they're trying to subtract 2 and 4, but the 4 is the one with the minus in front of it, who cares? You've already determined the sign. Just say 4 minus 2 and go on with it, right? So don't let things throw you. Okay, so let's look at some examples. Now I'm going to pull these examples straight from your homework. So they're going to be exactly the way you're going to see them when you're on Course Compass. Okay? We're going to do a lot of these because this is one of those things that students always get wrong in the beginning. And so you need to make sure that you are really familiar with everything we're going to be working with. So say we have 7 plus a parentheses with -3. Now this is one of the ones where later they're not going to write this parentheses. Later you're just going to see this as 7 minus 3. But right now they're trying to get you used to watching for the signs, so they're going to put most of the negatives, almost every time they put a negative, they're going to put it in parentheses. So I have to pretend like this is a parentheses problem. Bring down the 7. I don't bring down the plus because it's part of the parentheses, right? Is there anything I can do inside? Is there an exponent? And the coefficient or multiplier is a plus, right? Well, what's a positive times a negative make? Negative. And what will happen to the 3? Nothing, right? Because there is no number to multiply with. So remember that your multiplier can be just a sign. So positive times a negative became a negative, and nothing times 3 just stayed 3. Okay? Which looks exactly like the way I wrote it in the first place, right? And that's the way it'll be later after these two sections. And then, of course, 7 minus 3, we don't even need the sign rules for that, do you? Yeah, what's the sign of the 7? What's the sign of the 3? So we're going to, the signs are the same or different? So we'll keep the sign of the larger and do what to the numbers? Subtract them. Now notice I went ahead and wrote the plus. Do I need the plus in front of the 4? No. But I want your notes to be very complete. And I want you to recognize that probably the best thing that you can do, if you know you're one of these students who make sign errors, because chances are none of you have never been in an algebra class before, right? So you've worked with signs before. But also, I would say about 90% of the algebra mistakes made by students are sign errors. So focus on the sign. And the way to help focus on the sign is write down the sign all the time, whether you think you need it or not. If you write down every plus and every minus, then it'll draw your attention to it, right? Well, that'll help you keep from making mistakes. It's not necessary, but it's not wrong if you do it. Okay? If you know that you're one of these students that have trouble with signs, then use whatever tool you can to keep that from happening. So get another one. Negative 10 plus, in parentheses, negative 6. Now I'm going to give you a little shortcut here. If you don't see anything inside and there is no exponent, and that's a plus, then that plus is going to do absolutely nothing to that minus. Do you recognize that? Because a plus times a minus is a minus. So if you see a plus in front of a parentheses, a plus in front of a parentheses does nothing. It's not necessary. The only thing they're trying to do is say, hey, look at that. That's a negative 6. Well, who cares? Of course it's a negative 6. I know that because it's got a what in front of it? A minus, right? So if you see a plus in front of a parentheses, you can pretty much just ignore it. Okay? Now, the only reason, again, they're doing that is because they want you to see that that's a negative. And what they want you to see is that even though there's a plus in your original problem, you don't always end up adding, right? So be careful. So, now here, though, are the signs the same or different? Same. So I'll do what? Keep the sign and do what? Add the numbers. Good. Because they're the same, so we're going to put them together. So we'll add them. So your completed answer is negative 16. When should I determine the sign? First. Because most of the time students make mistakes, not because they don't know the rules, so that they just forget to write down the sign. Blows my mind. Okay? If you're going to do something, anything, and the first step is whatever, do you turn the page and go into step 4 and start there because you just don't want to do step 1? Start with step what? And the first part of every term is its. So if you're working with terms, you should always start with the sign. Okay? Get in good habits. Get out of your bad habits. And that's remember we talked about that the first day. Most of you, I'm going to spend more time trying to get you out of the bad habits that you've already made than we are trying to get you into good habits. The good ones are a lot easier to learn. All right. But it's not always your fault. Teachers do it too. We take lots of shortcuts. This teacher doesn't, but others do. All right. Look at this one. Negative 83.5 plus negative 21.3. Now, do I even need this parentheses?
No.
No. And the way I tell that is all there is a plus in front of it. So I could just even rewrite this without the parentheses if you want to. Okay? Now, what if this had been a minus in front of the parentheses? Does that mean the parentheses has to be there? Yes. So be careful with it. It's only when there's a plus there that you don't really need it. Now, are the signs the same or different? Same. So I'll keep the sign, and what am I going to do to the numbers? Add them. So it's 21.3. Just ignore the signs. But when you're adding decimals, you line up the decimal and then just add. So 8, 4, 10. The decimal in your answer is in the same place where it was. So that gives you 104.8. And it's, yeah. And since you already had your negative out there, then it's negative 104. Thank you. Yeah. Because now that we know the sign rules, from this point forward, there's no such thing as a 2. What is it? A positive 2 or a negative 2. So if you say 2, even though it's positive 2, I'm going to sit there and wait. Because I'm waiting for positive 2 or negative 2. Good. You don't always have to write them, but I do always want you to say them. Okay? Now, let's go what happens when you have more than one set of parentheses. Do you think it's going to matter if there's more than one set of parentheses? Well, we have to follow the parentheses rules then, right? Okay? But we always have been, no problem, no matter what. Looking at this problem, I have brackets and I have plain parentheses. Which one do I start with? Where does the plain parentheses actually begin? Yeah, with that plus in front of it. Excellent. Because remember, that plus is the coefficient, so it's part of the parentheses. So what I'm going to do is, I'm simply going to bring down everything that's not part of that plain parentheses. Then, I'm going to go back and work with the plain parentheses. There's nothing I can do inside. There is no exponent. There's a plus in front of it. Is a plus in front of a parentheses going to do anything to the parentheses? No, because a positive times a negative 7 just stays negative 7. Because a positive times a negative is still a negative. So the parentheses is gone. What do I need to work with next? Where does this bracket begin? With the positive outside of it. Excellent. So I'll bring down the 12. Everything else I'm going to leave there because I need to start working with it now, right? Where do I start? Inside. So I have 9 minus 7, which makes what? Positive 2. Is there an exponent? No. Positive times a positive is going to stay a positive. Now I had to write it because I'm going to write down the next term, right? This positive is not optional because it's between two terms, right? What happens if I left out the sign and I just put the numbers side by side? Would 122 be the correct answer there? No. So you got to make sure that to know when you can and when you don't have to write the signs. My advice is just write the signs always and you won't have to worry about it, right? And then finally, 12 plus 2 is, so positive 14 is your completed answer. Okay? So do you see that the sign rules don't affect the parentheses rules? You still just follow the rules just like you always have. And what we're doing here is we're just building a whole set of tools to use. Okay? So the one that has more parentheses. Negative 6 plus 7 plus negative 5 plus negative 3 in parentheses. Close your bracket. So in this one I have parentheses. How many different kinds of parentheses? 2. Which ones do I begin with? Simple plain parentheses. Where does the first plain parentheses begin? Plus in front of the negative 5. Good. Where's the second one begin? Plus in front of the negative 3. Good. Remember, those pluses and minuses are now the coefficients. They're part of that parenthesis, so they have to be included. So everything else, I'm just going to bring down. Now you can do this on fewer lines than I do, if you're careful and neat. But remember, in your notes, I'm going to do it on every line so you can go back and see exactly what happened every step. So we go first and look inside the parentheses, but negative 5, there's nothing I can do. Is there an exponent? Nope. Is there a coefficient? But a positive times a negative 5 just stays negative 5, right? Now the next one. Is there anything I can do inside? Is there an exponent? The coefficient is a positive, and a positive times a negative 3 just stays negative 3. So in other words, all they were trying to do was get you to say, hey, look at this, these are negative numbers, right? So that really weren't necessary. They didn't have to have them. Now I need to deal with what?
The bracket.
Brackets. Where does the bracket start? With that positive. So I'm going to bring down the -6, and I'm going to do what first when I'm working with this bracket? Inside. So I have 3 things to combine, right? And I know it's combined because there's no multiplication or division symbols. That means it has to be combined. So let's just do these 2 first. It's a +7 and a -5. Well, +7 minus 5 makes positive what? 2. That's just arithmetic, right? But then I have +2 minus 3. Are the signs the same or different? So I'm going to keep the sign of which one? And what do I do with the numbers? Oh, be careful. Subtract them because they're different. I'm going to take the difference. So that can make what? -1. Good. Is there an exponent on the bracket? And its coefficient is a plus. So positive times a -1 just stays -1. You seen it? Did these 2 first gave us our +2. +2 and -3 combined to make -1 because the signs are different. So I kept the sign of the larger and then subtracted 3 minus 2 to get the 1. And that gave me -1 because the positive didn't change its sign. And here, are the signs the same or different? So I will keep the sign and what? Add. Okay? So my completed answer is -7. Now, notice how I wrote these sign rules. And I'm going to hear it too. Notice that I always put the sign part first and then the number part second. But I guarantee that most of you learned this as add and what? Keep the sign? Subtract and keep the sign of the larger? That has always baffled me. If the sign is the first part, when should you do it? First. Well, by learning the rules the other way, it puts the sign at the end. What do y'all do with the end of stuff? You just forget it. It's like, you know what? If I can remember the first part, I'm good. I don't know what that is, but it happens all the time in mathematics and lots of other stuff. We get too lazy. All right. So don't let that happen to you. All right. Now, -3/14 plus 8/7. Yes, you will have fractions. Remember, you will not pass my class unless you can add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. I can guarantee it. All right. First, what operation are we dealing with? Is this multiplication? Is it division? No, therefore it must be combining, right? We can't really think of it as addition anymore. It's combining. And what kind of numbers are we combining? Fractions. In order to combine, right, our new term, in order to combine fractions, what do you have to have? Least common denominator. Will 7 divide evenly into 14? So the LCD for 7 and 14 is 14. Now I'm about to give you the trick that you're going to need for fractions that will take you forever through fractions if you'll do it. Do you notice that the negative is in front of the fraction, right? Anytime you have a sign in front of a fraction, when you're using it, you should always put that sign in the numerator. Never with the denominator. Okay? So this plus needs to go with that +8. Now when you're combining simple fractions like this, you can just bring the signs down, but later as they get more complex, they're going to have to go into the numerator. So what would you rather do? Learn one rule now and then change streams when the problems get harder? Learn the rule when the problems are easy, and then you'll have it down. Okay? So where do you put the sign? In the numerator. Good. If I change the denominator, I must also change the numerator. I use that divide, then multiply pattern. So for the first one, it's 14 divided by 14 is, and 1 times -3 is -3. All right? +1 times a -3 makes a -3. Now let's do the next one. 14 divided by what? Is 2, and it's a positive. 2 times 8 is 16. Okay. Changing the denominator to the new denominator is never going to change the sign. So after you put it in the numerator, then you can just go ahead and bring it down. Because your denominator is always going to be a positive. And a positive times a positive is going to stay a positive. Positive times a negative is going to stay a negative, right? So even though you put them up there, they're just going to come straight down being the same signs that they were. Okay? But I'm trying to develop a good habit there. Now what do I do in the top? Combine those. Are the signs the same or different?
Different.
So I'll keep the sign of the larger, which in this case is the positive. And notice that now that I'm going to have my completed answer, I put the plus back in front of the whole fraction. When you're working with it, you put it in the numerator, but when you're finished working with it, you put it where? Back in front of the whole fraction. Okay? And then 16 minus 3 is 13 over what? And there's your completed answer, because it won't reduce, will it? Okay? So don't forget fractions. You are going to have fractions. Okay? Let's see. All right. Then they're going to ask you to perform the operations and then tell them, is the statement true or false? Well, all that means is, when it's true or false, remember this is that same thing as, is it a solution or not? If you make a true statement, then it is a solution. If it's a false statement, it's not. Well, if it's a true statement, that means one side will equal the other, right? If it's false, that means they don't equal. So let's just do the math. Doing the math on this side, we're combining these. Are the signs the same or different? So we'll keep the sign of the larger and subtract the numbers. Whoops. It would be nice if I could subtract. So that gives us positive 3. Okay. So that's that side done. Let's go over here to this side. First I have to see if this parentheses means anything. There's nothing I can do to the side. There is no exponent. A positive times a positive 13 is still just positive 13. Do you agree? So 6, and then 16 plus 13 makes positive. Is this a true statement? No, this is a false statement. So basically all they want you to do is do the math and then answer the question, is it false or true? Okay. So just read the directions. It's pretty straightforward. Let's see. All right. Then they're going to give you some word statements that you need to translate and then do the math. So look at this one. It says Chris owed his brother $20. You bet. If you owe money, what kind of number is that?
Minus.
A minus, right? Okay. Then he borrowed 70 more.
It's again.
Again, if you borrow, that's a minus, yeah? So, what is his financial status right now? Worse than broke, right? Well, he had owed $20, now he owes $70, so what does that mean he does? Right. So right now he owes $90. So just put the appropriate sign with your numbers and then do the math. Okay? So his current status can be represented by negative $90. Okay?
Just a minute.
So just look at the keywords to tell you what sign the number should be, and then put in the right sign and do the math. Okay?
So would we say, hold on,
So negative 90 would have been your answer there.
it would be,
Mm-hmm.
because the signs are the same,
So we kept the sign, right,
okay,
and added the two numbers
so
together.
we say negative $90.
Yeah. And it's got the dollars in there for you already, so
Okay.
you're in good shape there. Okay? All right. What if it says, on 3 passes, a football team gains 8 yards. So that's a what? Plus 8. Okay. They lose 34 yards. So what's that? Negative 34. And then they gain 29 yards. Another positive. So, what do I need to do to find out their net yardage? Just combine all those. And notice that you have two numbers that are positive. Anytime you have a bunch of numbers to combine, a lot of times it's easier if you'll do all the positives together and then all the negatives and then take the two answers and work with them. Because remember, if you're working with things that the signs are the same, you're going to be doing what to them? Well, adding them, right? So 29 and 8 are going to make 37, positive 37. Minus 34 gives me positive 3. Okay? So anytime you have several different numbers to add together, if some of them are positive, take all the positives and put them together, and then take all the negatives and put them together, and then find the difference between those two totals. It just makes your life a lot easier if you'll always work with the ones that have the same signs first, and then do the ones that have different signs. Okay?
What is first sentence? Cheetah, chain zero?
What now?
Plus 8, just what is written there? Chain zero?
Gains 8 yards. Yeah, my writing is not great right there, but
Oh, it's 8.
it's an 8. Yeah. It's a gain of 8 yards, yeah. Okay? And you'll see these in your homework. These are coming straight from your homework, too. Okay? Jennifer owes $160 to a credit card company. Owes. So what?
Negative.
Negative under 60, right? She makes a $15 purchase with the card.
Another negative.
You bet, because she's borrowing more money by using that card, right? Then she pays $60 on the account. What is her current balance? So, these two are both negative, so I can combine those together if you want to. One makes negative 175. Plus 60. Are the signs the same or different? So we keep the sign of the larger and do what to the numbers? Which gives us... So she still owes $115. Okay? So you have some of these where you're just going to translate from words. Okay. All right.
Are we done?
No. Remember, I told you there are a lot of examples of this. This is a really long assignment because you really have to pay close attention. All right. Negative 8 minus 5. Is it multiply? Is it divide? Then it has to be combine, right? Combining. Are the signs the same? So I'll keep the sign and do what to the numbers? Add them. Okay? So watch out for the operation. You be really careful about what operation you have. Now also remember that I told you that when you have a plus in front of a parentheses does what? Nothing. Right? Stays the same because a positive times a positive is still a positive. Positive times a negative is still a negative. Do you think that's true when there's a negative in front of a parentheses? No, because when you multiply with a negative, it always changes the signs. So, here's our parentheses. We'll start there. There's nothing to do inside. There is no exponent. But this time our coefficient is a negative, right? So a negative times another negative becomes a positive 5. So be careful. And that's why you really need to just go ahead and treat every parenthesis the same. Because if you get used to asking yourself every question every time, then you're not going to make assumptions that aren't true. Okay? Now, of course, the signs are the same, so I'll just keep the sign and add. And what do I get? Positive 12. Do we have to write the plus? No, but it isn't going to hurt you. Okay? Negative 7 minus negative 6. What do I need to deal with first? Parentheses. And it starts with that negative. So I'm just going to bring down the negative 7. There's nothing I can do inside. There is no exponent. What's the coefficient? Just a negative. So a negative times another negative becomes a positive. And the number stays the same because there was no number to multiply with, right? Now I need to just combine them. Are the signs the same or different? So I'll keep the sign of the larger and do what to the numbers? Subtract them, so my finished answer is negative 1. Okay? So you see the process? You're walking yourself through a process. Let's look at this one.
Oh.
Negative 4 minus, and in parentheses I have 3 minus 7. Now remember, we always look at parentheses first. Where does this parentheses actually begin? That minus in front of it. So the negative 4 just comes down. Where am I going to look first with the parentheses? Inside. And inside I have 3 minus 7. So that's combining those two, right? Are the signs the same or different? So I'll keep the sign of the larger and do what to the numbers? So 3 minus 7 combined to make negative 4. Good. Is there an exponent on the parentheses? An exponent? No. Is there a coefficient? Yes. So that negative times that negative is going to become a positive what? 4, because the negative can change the sign, but it won't change the number, right? Then I just need to combine those. Well, negative 4 and positive 4, which one's the bigger number? Neither, because they're both 4s, aren't they? So you just subtract. If you subtract any number from itself, what is that always going to give you?
0.
A 0. And remember, we talked about last time, 0 is the only number that has no sign. Right? It's neither positive or negative. Okay. Look at these.
So it's going to be 0.
0 is your completed answer, huh? Negative 7 over 13 minus 2 over 3. Am I multiplying or dividing? No, therefore it must be combining. If you can't tell which operation to use, you're never going to be able to know which rule to use, right? So be careful. So if I'm combining, what kind of numbers? Fractions. Anytime you're working with fractions, you should automatically put the signs up with the what? Numerators. Right. Get in the habit of doing that. It makes a huge difference later. Then, I'm going to combine these fractions, which in order to add or subtract fractions, with combined fractions, you have to have a what? LCD. Will 3 divide into 13?
No.
Nope. 13 times 2 is 26. Will that work?
No.
13 times 3 is 39. Will that work?
Yes.
Yeah. If I change the denominators, I must also change the numerator. Using that divide, then multiply. So 39 divided by 13 is 3 times negative 7 is good. Okay? Now do the other one. 39 divided by 3 is 13 times negative 2 is negative 26. Good. Watch those signs. Okay? Then all I have to do is combine in the numerators. Are the signs up there the same or different? So I'll keep the sign and do what to the numbers? Add them. So it gives me 47 over 39. Will that reduce? No. And notice that when I put the sign, where did I put it this time?
The middle.
In the middle, because I put it right in front of the fraction. Because I'm through with the sign, right? Once I determine the sign of my answer, it needs to go back in front. When I'm using it, where should it go? In the numerator. Excellent.
If you get marked wrong, you put it with more on the top.
It's not really correct. If you put negative 47 over 39, that's just technically not quite correct. Because remember that even though if you can't divide the numbers, you should always divide the signs. So a negative divided by a positive would make the entire fraction a negative. So this is the correct answer. I don't think that Course Compass would count you wrong if you put the 47 in the top. I wouldn't be so happy with it. So, because it's just not, you're really not finished. Because you can still perform this division of a negative divided by a positive. So you're really not finished with the problem if you leave the negative up there. Okay?
So, and we don't have to make it really simple, like just to divide it like.
No, we don't want to change it to a mixed numeral. Yeah. So if it would reduce, you would have to, but this one won't reduce. It would change into 1 and something, but who cares, right? We don't do that in algebra. We only do that in arithmetic. Yeah, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay? All right.
Are we in the
I don't know what that is. It must be Art appreciation, music appreciation or something?
Yeah.
Well, they sure appreciated it at a loud level. That's kind of nice and soothing, though. A little chanting is what y'all need in here, probably. In about. That's true. Why doesn't he just give them all? Yeah. Oh well. All right. Here we go. Where's it going to go? Where are we going to start with this? So in parentheses. Here's the first one, and it doesn't have a sign in front of it, right? So we don't have to worry about it. Here's the second one. Where does it begin? With the negative in front of it, yeah. So everything that's not part of that parentheses, I'm just going to bring down. Okay? Get in the habit of doing that. I can't tell you how many students make just simple, stupid mistakes because they don't want to use one more line of notebook paper. Well, it's just as wrong, maybe more wrong, because if I have to dig through your answer to find your mistake, I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to count it wrong. Because I just shouldn't have to clean up your mess first and then find out what you did wrong. I'm not your mom. So I'm not going to do it. If it's wrong, and I can't find out what you did, I'm just going to count it wrong. Okay. Look first at this parentheses, looking where? Inside the parentheses. Do we have anything I can do inside? Yeah. 7 minus 4, I'm sorry, minus 6 is going to give me a positive 1. Good. Okay. Is there an exponent? Nope. Is there a coefficient this time? No. Why is it this minus out here the coefficient for that parentheses? Because it's outside the bracket. Right. That's the coefficient for the bracket. So get right neatly so you know where everything's going. So we just bring down our positive 1. And if you want, you could put the plus in front of it. It isn't going to hurt anything, is it? Okay. Now we'll go to the second parentheses and look where? Well, inside of it, right? Okay. So we have negative 7 minus 7.
Minus 14.
Right, the signs are the same, so you're going to keep the sign and add the numbers. Good. Is there an exponent on the parentheses?
Yes.
An exponent? No. Is there a coefficient?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a negative, so a negative times a negative 14 is going to become a positive 14. I'm going to bracket way further than I need, but I don't care. Now we're going to work on the bracket. Where does the bracket begin?
The negative.
You bet. Begins with the negative. So the negative 3 is just going to come down. Look where first? Inside. Be careful, inside. So positive 1 plus 14 makes positive what? 15. My coefficient is a negative. What is negative times a positive 15 going to become? Negative 15, right? It'll change the negative to the positive to a negative, but it won't mess with the number. And then now if we finish it up, are the signs the same or different? So I'll keep the sign and add them. So your completed answer, negative 18. As long as you keep the right operation, then these are a piece of cake.
Okay.
That's right.
So we get
Cake. All right. So let's look at another one. Don't panic on me. Just do it. Use the rules. You never have to do too much at one time.
what?
Okay. Here's our problem. Where do I begin with this problem? Order of operations says I need to do what first? Parentheses. Well, here's the first parentheses. And the second parentheses actually begins with that minus, right? That minus between them actually belongs to the second parentheses. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's start working the first parentheses by looking where? Inside. I'm combining fractions. So first thing I'm going to do is put my signs where? In the numerator. Get in the habit of doing that. In order to combine these two fractions, I need to have a LCD. Will 7 divide into 10? No. What's it going to turn out to be? 70. They don't have anything in common, so it's going to be 70. But if you change the denominator, you must also change the numerator. So, do the divide, then multiply. 70 divided by 10 is 7. And negative 7 times positive 7 is
Minus 49.
minus 49. Yeah, negative 49. Good. Now let's do the other one. 70 divided by 7 is 10. And negative 6 times 10 is minus 60. Okay? Now we'll just combine in the numerator. The signs of this, and so they're both negative, so your answer is going to be a negative. And 49 plus 60, because you add them when the signs are the same, right? Makes what?
100.
109. Okay? Over what?
7.
And that won't reduce, so we'll just leave it the way it is. Now we'll go over here and do this one. First looking where? Inside, I need to combine those. And since one of them is a fraction, what? I need to make them both be fractions. Because remember, when you're combining or doing anything, if you have a fraction, then the fraction rules take over. What's the LCD for 1 and 10? 10. If you change the denominator, you must also change the numerator. Remember, these minuses are going to go up here with the top. Okay. 10 divided by 10 is 1 times negative 11 is negative 11. 10 divided by 1 is, be careful, 10 times negative 7 is negative 70. Now, the signs are the same, so I'm going to keep the sign and add the numbers. Okay? Right. Now, but all I did was the inside of the parentheses. I still have to see if there's an exponent. Is there one? And then I still have to see if there is a coefficient. Is there one? It's a negative. So what is this negative going to do to my negative 81 over 10? So remember, if you go off to the side and do the stuff on the inside, don't forget the thing that's still in the front, right? If you lose that coefficient, then what happens is you would have had a negative there, so you would have ended up adding these, and that's not what it means, is it? So now I've got to combine these. The LCD for 70 and 10 is, I'm out of room,
So
70. Let's do it over there. Okay, so I still have to combine these, right? And that negative turned my negative 81 over 10 into a positive one. So it's 70. If I change the denominators, I must also change the numerator. 70 divided by 70 is 1 times negative 109 is still negative 109. 70 divided by 10, 7 times positive 81 is positive what? 567? There we go. Okay? Now combine those. Are the signs the same or different? So I'll keep the sign of the larger and do what to the numbers? Subtract them. So what is 567 minus 109 going to leave me? 458? Over what? Now, is that done? Why not? You know they'll at least divide by 2 because they're both even, right? So let's try divide them by 2. 458 divided by 2. Now I'm working my way up. I'm sorry, but I could go to another page, but I think it'll be even worse. What?
229.
229 over what?
35.
See if 229 will divide by 7.
No.
No? Then that's your final answer. Okay? And when you're looking back at this thing, I've tried to draw it. So it's a positive 229 over 35.
they will appreciate.
So when you look at the video, okay? This is a lot of work. Wow, look at that. Something with more than one step.
Is that all?
Almost. Give me a break, brats. Chris owed his brother $30. He later borrowed his brother 70. So what does that make? It's almost the same one we did a while ago, except it was 90. Let's see one more. Chris is, if he comes there, you get away. Kim owes $840 on her credit card. She returns 2 items that cost $35.75. Right, because she returned them, that means she's getting credit for those 2 items, right? So let's go ahead and just combine that. We'll keep a running total. It'll make our lives a little easier on this one because there's a lot. So what does that make? It's negative 8. Oh, wait, no. So, yeah. Come on, y'all got the calculators.
Negative 804.25.
God. Okay.
Right?
And return something else that costs $160. So that's adding another 160, right? Positive because she's returning it. That means she's getting credit for it. So what's that going to give us? Positive or negative?
Negative.
Yeah, signs first, please. Okay. Next, she makes a purchase of $84.50. $728.75.
Negative.
Negative. There you go. Okay. And 2 more purchases of $10 each.
Can we just say 20?
Minus 20. Good. That's what they were going to try to catch you with. Which gives us negative $748.75.
Plus.
And then she makes a payment of $500. What? Okay. What's that make?
Negative 248.75.
And then she gets charged a finance charge of $35.92. Okay.
Negative 284.67.
In other words, she never will pay you.
Not at that rate. How much does she still owe?
A lot.
$284.67.
A lot.
Now, would you type in, if it's how much she still owes, would you type in negative 284?
No.
If it said owed in front of the box?
No.
She owes $284, not negative $200. Because what if you had O in front of a negative? That means that's a double negative, isn't it? I ain't got no. Remember that? Okay. So that means that she would have had a $284 credit. You ever notice that if you have a credit, it's probably only happened to be like once in 870 years I've been alive, but if you have a credit on your account, they write it as a negative, right? Because that's what they owe you. All right. So we're going to go upstairs. We're going to work on